Waitress saves billionaire's daughter, but doctor's words leave everyone in shock. She thought it would be another ordinary night. Just a long shift, refilling water glasses, wiping down tables, and trying to ignore the dismissive stares of customers who looked at her uniform before they ever looked at her face. But fate doesn't wait for permission. It strikes in moments we least expect. The diner was buzzing with chatter, the clatter of silverware, and the smell of overcooked fries when she noticed the girl. Young, pale, her golden hair perfectly styled, her clothes far too fine for a place like this. And yet, she looked wrong. Her hands trembled as she tried to lift her fork. Her lips were turning the faintest shade of blue. Something deep inside told the waitress this wasn't just exhaustion or a faint spell. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. At first, no one else noticed. The girl's friends were too busy laughing at their phones, the other diners lost in their meals. But the waitress had seen this kind of thing before. Her younger brother had collapsed once from an allergic reaction. The signs were the same. And if she didn't act fast, this girl wouldn't make it. Her heart pounded as she rushed forward, kneeling by the girl's side. The friends scoffed at her, muttering about a waitress overstepping, but she didn't have time to argue. Within seconds, she had the girl in her arms, her voice breaking as she shouted for someone to call 911. No one moved. The room was frozen in shock. So she didn't wait. She grabbed the girl, pushed through the swinging doors, and ran into the night. Her car was old, barely running, but it was the only chance. She sped down the streets, the girl gasping in the back seat, every second stretching into an eternity. She didn't know who the girl was, didn't know the kind of wealth or power tied to her name. All she knew was that time was running out. But when the ER doors flew open and doctors swarmed the girl, what they discovered silenced the room. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fainting spell. The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving everyone stunned. She was poisoned. And the question lingered like smoke in the air. Who would want the billionaire's daughter dead, and why? The waitress's name was Alana Harris. 26 years old, a woman who had learned early that life doesn't hand out kindness equally. She had been working at Millie's Diner for nearly 3 years, the kind of place where the floor tiles never quite looked clean, where the neon sign flickered whenever it rained, and where tips depended entirely on the mood of strangers. For Alana, it wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady kept the lights on in the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother, Marcus. Every morning before work, she walked Marcus to the community center where he got tutoring help for his college prep exams. She wanted more for him, more than the hard grind she had been stuck in. She worked doubles, skipped meals, and hid the pain in her back from all the long shifts just so he could have the chance she never did. That was her life. Invisible sacrifices, unnoticed devotion. But invisibility came with its weight. Customers rarely looked her in the eye. Some made snide comments about her skin when they thought she couldn't hear. Others dismissed her suggestions on the menu as if she didn't exist. She had learned to swallow it down, to smile politely, to pretend it didn't sting. Still, there was always a fire inside her, a quiet, stubborn resilience that no amount of prejudice could put out. That evening, the diner was fuller than usual. A local sports game had ended, and people streamed in hungry, loud, and impatient. The air smelled of greasy burgers and burnt coffee, the buzz of chatter blending with the jukebox playing faintly in the background. Alana worked swiftly, balancing 3 orders in her head while refilling drinks with practiced ease. Then she noticed the group that had walked in. They didn't belong here, not really. Designer coats, flawless makeup, and an air of entitlement that stood out against the chipped booths and laminated menus. At the center was a young woman with striking features, bright blonde hair that framed a face too pale for her age, and eyes that seemed distant, almost unfocused. Alana felt a twinge in her chest when she saw her. Something wasn't right. While the friends ordered loudly, demanding without courtesy, the blonde girl barely touched her plate. She fidgeted with her water glass, her hand trembling slightly, her skin damp with sweat. Alana had seen exhaustion before. She had seen stress, but this was different. Her instincts sharpened, recalling the night Marcus had collapsed at home years ago. The shortness of breath, the bluish tint, the confusion in the eyes. She couldn't shake it, but she also knew her place. She was just the waitress. Speaking up could mean mockery or worse, accusations that she was interfering. She stood frozen for a moment, caught between duty and fear of humiliation. Then it happened. The girl's fork clattered to the floor. Her body slumped against the booth. A ripple of alarm spread across the table, but her so-called friends reacted with annoyance more than concern, one even rolling her eyes as if the girl was being dramatic. Alana didn't wait. She pushed through, her tray nearly tipping over as she rushed to the booth. She crouched beside the girl, her voice sharp, commanding, "Call an ambulance." Now, but no one moved. The friends muttered, one sneering, "Stay out of this, she'll be fine." Another reached for the girl lazily, as if Alana's urgency was an overreaction. That was the moment she knew. If she didn't take control, no one would. In one motion, she slid her arms under the girl's frail frame, lifting her despite the startled gasps around the room. She could hear the whispers. What is she doing? She's just a waitress. This isn't her problem. But it was her problem now. Alana pushed through the doors, the girl's weight heavy against her chest. She didn't stop to explain, didn't stop to care. Her old beat-up Toyota was parked around the corner, and though her hands trembled, her mind was clear. She had one mission: save this girl's life. And yet, as she drove through the night, her knuckles white on the steering wheel and the girl gasping for air in the back seat, Alana couldn't help but wonder, why had no one else cared? Why had they looked at her with judgment instead of urgency? She didn't know it then, but the answer would be darker than she could imagine. And by the time the hospital doors flew open, Alana's act of courage would drag her into a world of secrets, wealth, and a deadly truth hidden beneath privilege. Because the doctor's verdict would shock them all, this wasn't a fainting spell. She had been poisoned. The emergency room doors swung open with a hiss, and Alana stumbled inside, her arms wrapped tightly around the limp body of the billionaire's daughter. Nurses rushed toward her, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, eyes wide at the sight of the pale, unconscious girl. Alana's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath shallow from both the weight she had carried and the weight of fear pressing down on her. The hospital staff whisked the young woman away on a gurney, attaching wires and oxygen masks in swift, clinical motions. Alana, left behind in the bright, sterile hallway, felt her knees wobble. She sank into a plastic chair, sweat cooling on her skin, her diner apron still clinging to her. For a moment, she simply sat there, listening to the muffled chaos beyond the double doors. Minutes ticked by, stretching endlessly. Then, a doctor appeared, his face drawn with a seriousness that silenced the hallway around him. She wasn't just dehydrated or fainting, he said, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. She's been poisoned. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alana's heart lurched. Poisoned. The girl had walked into the diner alive and breathing. How could this happen? Within the hour, everything changed. Police officers crowded the ER waiting area. Reporters had somehow caught wind of the situation, their whispers rippling through the corridors. And soon, a man in an immaculate suit arrived, the billionaire father. His presence filled the space instantly. Tall, commanding, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp jawline. He looked every bit the man who owned skyscrapers and headlines. His eyes, however, were anything but calm. He stormed past everyone, demanding answers, his gaze darting from the unconscious figure of his daughter behind the glass to the cluster of doctors who hesitated to approach him. And then his attention snapped to Alana. She was still sitting in the waiting area, her diner uniform stained, her braids slightly frizzed from the rush. To him, she must have looked out of place in this world of polished wealth and controlled power. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing before gratitude ever had a chance. "You," he barked. "What were you doing with her? Who are you?" The question sliced through her. She opened her mouth, fumbling for words, but the weight of a dozen stares silenced her. The nurses, the police, the billionaire's entourage, all of them looked at her like she was an intruder in a story she had no right to enter. Finally, she found her voice. I'm a waitress." She collapsed at the diner. No one was helping her, so I brought her here. The words should have been simple, noble even. But in that moment, they sounded like a confession. The billionaire's jaw tightened. "And you expect me to believe you just decided to play the hero? My daughter, in some rundown diner, and you're the one who saves her? Convenient." Alana's stomach dropped. It wasn't gratitude he was offering, it was accusation. His tone carried an unspoken message. People like you don't touch people like us. The officers began asking questions, their notepads ready. Where had she been when the girl collapsed? Had she served her food? Did she notice anything unusual? Each question felt less like an attempt to find the truth and more like a hunt for blame. Alana answered steadily, but her hands trembled in her lap, her throat dry. She thought of Marcus, of the rent due next week, of how quickly her entire life could unravel with just one false assumption. As the questioning continued, snippets of conversation floated around her. She was poisoned before she even arrived. No trace of it in the diner food. Could have been slipped into her drink hours earlier. Still, suspicion lingered. Eyes kept darting back to Alana, as though her skin alone made her the easiest target. Then, another figure emerged. A younger man in a tailored suit, the billionaire's aide, perhaps. He leaned down to whisper in his boss's ear, his gaze flicking briefly toward Alana. Whatever he said made the billionaire's face harden further, his stare burning with something more dangerous than grief, contempt. Alana's chest tightened. She could feel the narrative shifting, not in her favor. She had done everything right, saved the girl's life, rushed her to safety. And yet here she was, sitting under a shadow of suspicion thicker than any gratitude could pierce. The night dragged on. Doctors fought to stabilize the young woman, whispers of critical condition slipping through the cracks. Reporters began speculating wildly in the lobby. Police officers muttered about running toxicology tests. And through it all, Alana sat alone, her presence both necessary and unwanted, as if she were a puzzle piece no one wanted to fit into the picture. By dawn, exhaustion pulled at her bones, but sleep was impossible. She had thought that saving someone's life would make her feel like a hero. Instead, it made her feel like a criminal waiting for a verdict. And in that uneasy stillness, one thought gnawed at her. If the girl had truly been poisoned before she even stepped into the diner, then who wanted her dead? And why was it easier for everyone to point a finger at the black waitress who tried to help, instead of looking closer at the powerful world the girl came from? The answer was coming. And when it did, it would shake the walls of the hospital, exposing truths darker than Alana or anyone was ready for. The sterile hum of the hospital machines filled the room, each beep a reminder of how fragile life could be. The billionaire's daughter lay pale against the white sheets, tubes running from her arms, monitors glowing red and green around her. Doctors huddled at the foot of her bed, their whispered words cloaked in urgency. Then, the chief physician, a stern man with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped forward. His gaze swept the room, the father pacing like a caged lion, the officers waiting with pens poised, the reporters trying to sneak glances through the glass. Finally, he spoke. "We've confirmed it," he said, voice heavy with authority. "This wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately poisoned her. A rare compound, carefully measured. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." The words cracked through the air like a gavel. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. The billionaire slammed his fist against the metal railing of the bed, his voice thunderous. "Find out who did this. My daughter nearly died tonight, and someone is going to pay." His eyes darted instantly to Alana, who had been sitting in the corner, trying to make herself small. "There she is," he snapped, pointing. "The waitress. She was with her. She served her. Why else would she be involved?" Alana shot up to her feet, heat rising to her face. "I didn't poison her," she shouted, her voice breaking under the pressure. "I carried her here. I saved her life." But her words drowned in the storm. Two officers stepped forward, one already reaching for his cuffs. The billionaire's glare burned into her like fire. "You expect me to believe you just happened to be there when this happened? People like you don't just stumble into my daughter's life unless you're looking for something." Gasps rippled through the crowd, some from outrage at his insinuation, others from the audacity of Alana daring to talk back. Her chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat. She thought of her little brother, Marcus. She thought of the diner, of the paycheck she had yet to collect. And then, she thought of the girl, the billionaire's daughter, lying unconscious on the bed, her life hanging by a thread. Alana had fought to save her, and now she was about to be destroyed for it. "Enough!" The doctor's voice cut through the noise. His face was pale, but his tone brooked no argument. "If you're looking for someone to blame, look elsewhere. The toxicology results show the poison wasn't ingested at the diner. It was introduced earlier. Hours earlier, the room froze. Alana blinked, her breath caught mid-chest. Relief surged through her veins, but it was short-lived because the billionaire's expression didn't soften, it hardened. "Then who?" he demanded, stepping closer to the doctor. His voice lowered, dangerous. "Who had access to her before tonight?" The doctor hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to the billionaire. That flicker was enough to shift the air. The crowd noticed. The officers noticed. And Alana noticed. Her mind raced. She had seen the daughter arrive at the diner already looking pale, already uneasy. She had ordered a drink, barely touched her food. The signs had been there long before she collapsed. It hit Alana like a lightning strike. Whoever poisoned her had been close, very close. Someone trusted, someone in her circle. And in that realization, Alana found her voice. "You're blaming me because I'm the easiest target," she said, her voice steady now, ringing louder than she thought possible. "But your daughter walked into that diner already poisoned. Look at the people around her, the ones who had access before tonight. Maybe the truth isn't as far away as you want it to be." The words hung heavy, sparking whispers among the staff and officers. For the first time, the billionaire's certainty cracked. His jaw clenched, but his eyes shifted, not to Alana, but to his own aide standing silently by the door. The aide's face drained of color, his eyes darting away under the sudden scrutiny. A flicker of panic passed over him, gone as quickly as it appeared. But Alana saw it. The doctor saw it. And now, so did the police. The storm of accusation had turned. And the billionaire's rage, once aimed squarely at Alana, was beginning to turn inward, toward the very circle he trusted most. The room bristled with tension. Everyone knew something explosive was about to happen. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Every pair of eyes lingered on the billionaire's aide, the young man who had always stood quietly in the background, fetching documents, whispering updates, shadowing his powerful employer. Now, in the harsh fluorescent glow of the emergency ward, the silence around him seemed louder than any confession. The aide's hands twitched as the billionaire turned toward him, his fury burning into suspicion. "You," he hissed. "Why are they looking at you? Why won't you meet my eyes?" The aide stammered, his lips parting as though words might come, but none did. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. The chief physician's tone cut like a scalpel. "The poison used. This compound isn't easy to come by. It's expensive, rare. It would take resources, connections, and planning. Whoever administered it didn't just want her sick. They wanted her gone." Gasps rippled through the gathering. The billionaire's face darkened, but not at Alana this time. He took a slow, deliberate step toward his aide. "You've been with my family for years," the billionaire growled. "Trusted, paid, protected. And this is what you do." The aide's voice cracked as he finally spoke, his mask of professionalism shattering. "You don't understand. I didn't want to hurt her. I was trying to protect myself. He stopped short, realizing too late he had said too much. Two officers closed in, gripping his arms before he could retreat. He struggled, but their hold was iron. The entire hospital corridor seemed to vibrate with disbelief. The billionaire's daughter stirred weakly on the bed, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. Her lips parted as though to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped. Why? It was a question that hung not just over the aide, but over the billionaire himself. Because in truth, the man's rage, his quickness to accuse Alana, wasn't only about fear for his daughter. It was about control. It was about a lifetime of assuming that those beneath him, especially someone like Alana, were expendable shields for his pain. Alana stood frozen, her heart pounding. Relief washed over her, but it was tangled with something deeper, exhaustion, sadness, and a sharp edge of anger. She had saved this girl's life, carried her into the hospital, and still nearly lost her own future in the process. One accusation, one assumption, and she had almost been destroyed. The billionaire finally turned back to her, his eyes a storm. You saved her?" His voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. Alana didn't flinch. "Yes. While you were too busy pointing fingers, I was making sure she had a chance to breathe again." A silence spread, different from the heavy silence before. This one was uncomfortable, charged with realization. For once, people in that room saw the truth without filters. A young black waitress, tired from a double shift, had shown more humanity, courage, and grace than the powerful men circling her like vultures. The billionaire opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to excuse himself, but no words came. His empire of pride had cracked, and in that crack, shame poured through. The officers led the aide away in handcuffs. Whispers filled the halls as cameras caught the scene. Reporters who had gathered outside the ER doors scrambled to frame the story. Billionaire's daughter poisoned by someone inside her own circle, saved by the most unlikely of heroes. But for Alana, it wasn't about headlines. It was about survival. Later that night, after the chaos dimmed, she stepped outside the hospital. The cool night air wrapped around her like a balm, carrying away the sterile sting of antiseptic and tension. She leaned against the brick wall, staring up at the stars. For the first time since the collapse at the diner, she let herself breathe. She thought of Marcus. She thought of the diner. She thought of how close she had come to being swallowed whole by a lie. And then she thought of the girl inside, fragile, vulnerable, but alive. The truth was out. Justice, at least for now, was moving in the right direction. But Alana knew how quickly things could have gone differently. She knew that if not for the doctor's intervention, or that flicker of guilt on the aide's face, she might have been sitting in a cell instead of under the stars. And that truth weighed heavy, because it wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been accused before being believed. Every person who had been forced to carry the burden of suspicion because of the color of their skin, their class, or their place in society. The billionaire's daughter would recover, and headlines would fade. The aide would face trial, and the story would move on. But for Alana, the night would never fully leave her. It would live on as a scar, a reminder of how fragile dignity can be when the world sees you as less than. She pushed herself away from the wall and walked into the night, her steps slow but steady. Tomorrow, she would go back to the diner. Tomorrow, she would slip back into the world that had nearly erased her tonight. But she would carry something the billionaire could never buy, the knowledge that when the moment came, she had stood her ground. Her life was not defined by the accusation, nor by the billionaire's rage. It was defined by her courage to act when someone else needed her most. And as the city lights glimmered in the distance, she knew one truth above all others. The world may try to write her story, but only she could decide how it ended. This wasn't just a story about a poisoned girl or a waitress wrongly accused. It was about how quickly society can turn suspicion into judgment, and how often the people least expected to be heroes carry the weight of saving lives. The question we're left with is simple. How many more Alanas must prove their humanity before the world finally sees it without doubt?